Good morning. Good morning, everyone. We'll start today the press conference with an update from Dr. Levine.
Thank you, Governor. We just have two data slides to show you this morning. One is a familiar one, which again looks at the number of new cases on a day-by-day basis. And as you can see, we continue to be in a downslope of the epidemiologic curve. And on the second slide, this is a new one. This is called syndromic surveillance. What that means essentially is how often do Vermonters present to urgent care settings or to hospital emergency settings with a set of symptoms that might sound like COVID-19, or where they actually might say, I'm wondering if I have COVID-19. And this begins about exactly a month ago and goes to the present. And I think you'll see the same kind of phenomena, that approximately 6% of those visits back in late March were related to, were for COVID-19 type symptoms. And now as we get into late April, we're in the 1 or 2% range. So Vermonters are finding that there are less illness out there at this point in time. And I just need to again express appreciation and congratulations to Vermonters, because it's all of the strategies that we've asked you to pursue and follow in your day-to-day life that have led to that kind of relative suppression of viral activity. The main topic I want to discuss this morning, somewhat due to popular demand, is COVID-19 mortality. We just did an assessment. There, as you know, have been around 40 deaths in Vermont. We did an assessment of the first 29, so 3/4 of all the deaths that have occurred related to COVID. And I'll just give you a few of the details behind that. Out of the 29, 13 were patients in long-term care facilities, and 16 were not patients at long-term care facilities, and all but 2 of those were over age 65. Every single individual had what we call significant comorbidities, other diseases that put them at higher risk. Some heart disease, some lung disease, some kidney disease, some immunosuppressing conditions, some obesity. Like we're seeing on the national stage, there were more males than females, and the ratio was 60-40. As I mentioned, most were over 65 years of age. If you look at the 13 that were in long-term care facilities, the median age was 80, with a range from 70 to 95. If you look at those who were not in long-term care facilities, the 16, the same median age of 80, though the range was slightly different, 39 to 93. 26 of the 29, we had race and ethnicity data available, and 24 of those 26 were white, non-Hispanic. Looking a little more at the long-term care facility population, the residents who died at the long-term care facilities, each one of those facilities had at least one resident or staff member who had COVID-19. And except for 2 patients who were actually hospitalized before death, all of the others died at the residential facility they were at. If we look at the 16 who were not in long-term care facilities, all except 2 were over 65. Only 2 had travel outside of Vermont. 5 had known contact with a COVID-19 case, and almost all of these were hospitalized. And almost all had mechanical ventilation at the time they were hospitalized prior to their death. And again, they all had 1 or more chronic medical conditions. Obviously, every life that we've been discussing special to many people, and it's a devastating occurrence. I do understand the urge to try to look for conclusions in these data. While we can't do that comprehensively, it really is interesting that these cases reflect what we're seeing nationally and around the world. Based on what we know, older adults and people who have serious underlying medical conditions appear to be at higher risk for severe illness for COVID-19, much like we've been talking about for many weeks now. And as you've been hearing, our efforts to flatten the curve are starting to make a difference, but this isn't over yet. And continuing to take action to protect yourself and those around you is really still critical. Staying home and leaving only for essentials, wearing a cloth face covering when you leave your home, and staying home and contacting your healthcare provider by phone if you are ill. And you'll be hearing more from the governor as the week goes on regarding other strategies the state is using to reopen things in Vermont based on the fact that we've achieved such a nice stage of depression in this period of time. I'll turn it back to the governor.
Thank you, Dr. Levine. Before I get to the topic at hand today, there are two updates I want to give. First, on unemployment insurance. We're continuing to clear claims as fast as we can to get Vermonters the benefits they deserve. Over the last 2 days, we've issued 46,000 payments. On top of the 8,300 checks sent out on Monday, that represents $52 million heading to Vermonters so far this week. I know this has been very difficult for many and will continue to work in order to turn the corner and provide some relief. That doesn't mean it's going to be perfect. There's going to be some bumps in the road, but we'll face them and continue to put people over the process to make sure Vermonters get the money back into their pockets to put food on the table and pay bills. We're also standing up our new call center later today with additional customer service reps being added throughout the next week. All these steps should help people get through on the phone for more help. Our teams at the Departments of Labor and the Agency of Digital Services will also stand up the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance Program, which was authorized by Congress for those who don't qualify for traditional unemployment. There are still some steps being completed, but self-employed and independent contractors who can't work because of COVID-19 will hear from the state later today with more information on how to apply. Commissioner Harrington is on the line with us today to answer any further questions on that topic. Next, I want to talk about something that may be even more important today than it was before this pandemic began, and that's the 2020 census. It's a complete count of everyone in Vermont, which is important to our state because it's used to calculate funds for things like disaster relief, infrastructure projects, school food programs, and so much more. Let's be honest, federal funding is going to be more critical than ever as we help support the needs of Vermonters during these times. And even in the best of times, an accurate count is so important to our state and local budgets. Currently, we have about 108,000 Vermont households who have responded to the 2020 census, which is only about 42%. We're at the bottom of the list in terms of states who have responded. That means about 152,000 homes have not filled them out at this point. So, I know we're already asking a lot of Vermonters, but I'd appreciate it if you could take 5 minutes today and fill it out online by going to 2020census.gov or by phone at 844-330-2020. It's a really pretty simple process. It shouldn't take much time, and again, it's so beneficial to our state. Now to the topic at hand. Today we wanted to take some time to update you on what's going on with our schools across the state as they implement their education plans to help students learn during these very unusual times. As you know, due to the need for social distancing, we unfortunately had to close or dismiss schools for in-person learning through the end of the school year. Admittedly, this was a difficult step because I know the bonding and learning experience kids get at school is incredibly important. And while this was necessary to help slow the spread and save lives, I know it's been incredibly difficult for kids, families, and schools across the state. So I want to thank our school administrators, teachers, and all school employees for stepping up to this challenge and for your creativity and caring for your students. But I especially want to give credit to all the parents out there who, while juggling work and childcare, are helping their kids get assignments done, join Skype meetings, and trying to keep up with everything from art projects to PE. I know this has been pretty stressful for everyone involved, and I appreciate your cooperation. The team at the Agency of Education, with support from the Public Service Department and Agency of Digital Services, are doing all they can to help students stay connected. And I'm pleased to have Secretary French, Commissioner Tierney here with us today to share more about what they're doing. And we also have Secretary Quinn on the phone as well. I believe actually Secretary French is on the line as well. So I'll now turn it over to Secretary French. Actually, he's on video. I'll turn it over to Secretary French.
Thank you, Governor. Good morning. When schools were closed under the initial order, the expectation was districts would do what they could to maintain basic academic programming. But once the extended period of school closure was announced, we shifted that work to focus on supporting student learning and academic growth as if schools were still open for in-person instruction. And we called this transition continuity of learning. And our schools made this shift on April 13th. This has been a tremendous undertaking, as you noted, for teachers, students, and their families. Like other education systems around the world affected by COVID-19 outbreak, we had to create a plan to move forward very quickly without any real roadmap. We were able to pull together our best thinking and design a Vermont continuity of learning plan template based on Vermont values and expertise, while at the same time allowing districts the flexibility to use their ingenuity and creativity to meet the needs of their students. School districts and approved independent schools have been required to submit continuity of learning plans to the agency based on this plan template. These plans are required to address 4 key areas: communication, how schools will communicate with students and parents; structures for student success, the instructional supports for students and how they can be accessed; instruction and feedback, the structure of how instruction will actually be delivered and student work evaluated; and lastly, ensuring accessibility to ensure all students will have access to educational resources and academic supports. As we had the initial drafts start to come in for these plans, we decided to extend the plan requirements to our CTE centers since their learning strategies are unique and their focus on applied learning and student obtaining industry credentials is different than the rest of the system. Because of the virus, the nature of many CTE programs have changed as a result, and the delivery and the outcomes of the programs had to be modified. CTE programs like business, finance, IT, accounting, graphic design, and similar programs where the applied context is based on computer-based instruction have had little difficulty in this environment. Other programs such as construction, automotive, diesel mechanics, agriculture are more difficult to move online, even though instructors are using computer-based simulations to a certain extent. These teachers have had to get really creative to deliver instruction for CTE programs. For example, at the Career Center in Newport, the cosmetology teacher sent home mannequins with all of her students so that they can practice haircuts on the mannequins. Now, the teacher uses video conferencing to evaluate the students doing their work in real time. At the Career Center in Barrie, teachers packed up boxes of materials and supplies with small hand tools for students to pick up at the center to work on the hands-on portion of their courses at home. The teachers also purchased some kits and delivered those to the homes of their students to help meet some of the core proficiencies of that program. Like many CTE programs, the Diversified Agriculture program in Canaan has shifted to project-based instruction. Students there are working independently on projects monitored by the instructor when the instructor meets with the students regularly online. For example, one student repaired a chainsaw and sold it online. Other students are working on repairing farm machinery such as logging skidders. For another student, the instructor delivered some maple syrup to the student's house, and the student is developing a maple syrup recipe book using their family members to help taste test the recipes. The key challenge with CTE programs is to figure out how students can obtain their industry credentials. We are working with other states to evaluate the possibility of using our federal Perkins funds to offer summer credential attainment camps with a focus on those CTE programs that are more difficult to move online. This would allow seniors in part-time programs and juniors or seniors in full-time programs to elect to participate in summer programming aimed at getting the students to complete an industry-recognized credential that they started during the school year. There are still a lot of the details that need to be worked out, but we think this might be an option. There's a lot of CTE instruction that's being delivered online, including specific technical training, safety and first aid, and dual enrollment courses with colleges. CTE teachers, like their counterparts in our other schools, are using online tools to deliver the classroom portion of their instruction. This is why we'll be expanding access to an online learning management system through the Vermont Virtual Learning Cooperative, so all Vermont teachers can have better access to these kinds of tools. All the continuity learning plans for CTE centers and school districts include a variety of means for students to access their educational programs, but technology and internet use is a central feature of these plans, since technology can be a very effective tool for communicating with students, delivering instruction, and for teachers to collaborate with each other in designing lessons and curriculum. As we know, however, not all students or teachers in Vermont have adequate access to the internet. So schools have had to get creative to address these issues of access. I thought I would share some of these stories with you to give you a sense of how schools have been working with their communities to resolve these issues on behalf of students and their families. Arlington High School purchased Wi-Fi hotspots for families and staff. They also obtained commercial hotspots, teamed up with businesses to place them in large parking lots around town so families can have reliable access. In Rutland, the school's IT department partnered with VTEL and Ericsson to provide broadband access and routers to families who didn't have them, and then subsequently distributed hundreds of Chromebooks to students across the district. The Slate Valley School District in Fairhaven has worked tirelessly to bring internet to their families who did not have access. Working with their teachers and principals, they've been able to get about 20 plus families up and running on the internet. Richford also reported they have invested a lot of time in helping families get connected to the internet. All of their families have been contacted by the guidance counselor or principal to discuss free internet options. They are down to a handful of families without internet, and the district is now getting an account with AT&T, and they are going to purchase hotspots for the remaining families and pay the $40 a month service fee. Burlington School District worked closely with Burlington Telecom and Comcast to ensure all of their families have access. Burlington Telecom created a special landing page on their website in multiple languages to support the diversity of Burlington families in accessing remote learning resources. School district multilingual liaisons reached out to every one of their families to make sure that they were aware of the Comcast and Burlington Telecom services. Burlington Telecom also built out new access to apartments in the city once they learned a large number of students lived in that area. In Lamoille South in the Stowe area, the district partnered with the Capstone Community Action, and with generous donations of a national foundation and members of the Jewish community of Greater Stowe, they were able to provide 50 cell phones and Wi-Fi hotspots to families that needed internet access. Twin Valley School District down in Wilmington shared with me a few personal stories. One parent had cell service with unlimited data plan. The school's guidance team taught the parent how to set up their phone as a hotspot for their child's Chromebook. Another parent was unable to pay their internet bill before the crisis hit, so their service had been suspended. The district worked with that family to fundraise the money to help them pay their bill. In Windsor, the district IT team deployed outdoor access points to all their campuses, providing fast, free public Wi-Fi for all their students and families. This was a significant undertaking requiring thousands of feet of cable to be run in a very short amount of time. Students and families now are able to access high-speed internet from the school parking lots. In Danville, where access is very limited, the school took a similar approach. They opened their school network to 24/7 guest access, opened up guest access on their routers to full speed, and let people know in the community that the parking lot and the hillside outside the school are always accessible. As you can see from these stories, solving these last mile access issues for Vermont students and their families has been a combination of procuring the necessary technology and access, but also about neighbors helping neighbors to support the children and families of their communities. Remote learning cannot replace in-person instruction, but I'm confident from what I've seen so far that our educators and communities will continue to do their best to ensure each student is supported and actively engaged in an appropriate learning program during this public health emergency. We've been very fortunate to have the partnership and support of other state agencies in this work, and their dedication to our students and families has been essential. I'll now introduce Commissioner Tierney of the Department of Public Service to speak further on this.
Thank you, Secretary French. My name is June Tierney. I am the Commissioner of the Department of Public Service. It's a pleasure to be speaking directly with Vermonters today about this critical issue of connectivity during the pandemic. You've heard many examples from Secretary French about how communities are helping themselves through this pandemic. What the department has been focused on, in addition to that, is trying to reach Vermonters who we know are out there, but who do not have connectivity solutions. As you know, Vermonters are staying home and staying safe during the COVID-19 emergency, but for many, that has meant getting by with no internet access at home. And this difficulty has been particularly challenging for students who are adapting to remote learning, individuals in need of telehealth care, and workers who could be earning an income if they could only work from home. If this is your situation, we need to hear from you, and I am asking you to contact the Department of Public Service by calling 1-800-622-4496. The Consumer Affairs Division has folks on hand who are standing by to take your calls and who would be glad to get some basic information about you, from what your address is and what your particular situation is that you are not able to access the internet. Until we have that information, we can't see you. And if we can't see you, we can't help you, but we very much want to. The COVID-19 emergency has starkly exposed how dependent we are on frequent and reliable internet access to meet everyday needs. Before COVID-19, folks could count on regular access to the internet from many different places, such as their workplaces or libraries or schools. But now that we're staying home to slow the spread of the COVID-19 virus, the reality is that most of us need internet access at home. It's no stretch to say that the internet has become the major highway in Vermont for essential everyday services. Like Tropical Storm Irene, the impact on our state of the COVID-19 emergency is very much like a massive natural storm disaster that has ripped away bridges and roads for many Vermonters. They are now isolated in their homes, unable to reach us, and we're unable to reach them. Even if it is only temporary, we need to find ways now to get internet to people where they live. We need to reconnect these Vermonters to us. They belong to us, and we belong to them. And I can assure you, Governor Scott is laser focused on this issue. To help with the immediate emergency, the department has published a Wi-Fi hotspot map. It details places you can go, much as you heard from Secretary French just now, to access the internet from the safety and social distance of your car. I'm also pleased to say that since this map was published at the onset of the pandemic, Vermonters have been doing things the Vermont way. They have been crowdsourcing and sharing with us additional spots to supplement that map so that every day it becomes a more useful tool for all of us. I'm also very pleased to announce that the department had identified 38 towns and gores in Vermont that had no connectivity at all, no public Wi-Fi spot. And thanks to companies like VTEL and Microsoft and RTO Wireless, Vermont now has several new Wi-Fi hotspots that are being deployed as we speak in these communities, and who now have a means of reconnecting to us. The department has also been working with Dish Networks, which now has an agreement to include PBS channels in its offerings, and this will help with remote learning. This was an early ask from educators, and we're very grateful to Dish Networks for making this possible, and PBS as well. The department's also been facilitating a conversation with Cloud Alliance in the Northeast Kingdom and New England Wireless to build a new service territory in the 12-town Kingdom East School District. This is not a new thing as much as it is a progress in this conversation with urgency, moving folks forward, connecting folks together who perhaps were all working on the same thing but did not know each other. Indispensable in that process has been Velco, the state's transmission company. Again, this is Vermont, classic Vermont, doing it the Vermont way. These are just some of the things that we've been doing to improve on the lack of connectivity in the state of Vermont, but it is by no means done, and there is so much more work still ahead. But I have to say, it is very encouraging to see how Vermonters are coming together to help each other. Inspired by the work with Velco, I issued a call to action to Vermont's utilities on April 10th, asking them to see if they could work with utility or with internet service providers to find ways to team up and improvise connectivity solutions. What I mean by that is, if there is a GMP substation someplace and there is Velco wire fiber close by, is there an internet service provider who could put up a WISP antenna or some form of signal technology to beam a wireless internet connection in that immediate area? It's early days. This call to action went out on April 10. All of these organizations are serious commercial enterprises that have boards and the directors and the like that they need to consult with, but I am hopeful that some solutions will be found in that direction. Most encouraging, for instance, was the very first response I received to that call to action, which was from Franklin Telephone in Franklin, Vermont. Kim Gates up there immediately contacted me and said, "Commissioner, we're on this. We have lashed 8,000 feet of fiber just this week." They installed a Wi-Fi hotspot on Main Street in Franklin, and they're looking to deploy further gear in order to increase their internet speeds. I don't know what was more encouraging, the fact that that Franklin Telephone has done these things, or the fact that Franklin Telephone stepped out without having first been asked. But I was very gratified to hear from them in response to the call to action, and I have good confidence that more such responses will be forthcoming. I know that VGS, Vermont Gas Systems, Velco, GMP, BED, and Comcast have all been active in this space. I'm sorry to say I don't have specifics for you today on what these companies are doing, but I am here to tell Vermonters that their energies are focused in this direction to help close the connectivity gaps. The department is also tackling the companion challenge that Secretary French identified of finding students and finding out why it is that they need connectivity solutions. As you heard, much of this work is being done at the ground level in communities, but there's also an overarching outreach that we're doing by making a direct appeal to Vermonters to identify themselves to the department. So again, if you have a student at home who needs connectivity in order to be able to do remote learning, or if you have somebody at home who is ill and who needs remote connectivity in order to get telehealth, or if you have somebody at home who's newly out of a job and who would like to get a job. For instance, companies like Amazon are actively hiring at $17 an hour, and you can work remotely from home. If you need remote access through the internet, please contact us at 1-800-622-4496. The folks at CAPI in my division will need to ask you a few questions about who you are, why you can't get connected to the internet. They will be asking you whether you're located without access to cable or fiber service, or is it the case that you have no wireless cell signal that could be used to extend broadband to your home? I can't guarantee solutions for you, but I can tell you that we cannot begin to get help to you unless you identify yourselves to us first. If we get this information from you, we will then be looking to find clusters of folks who need solutions, and then extending a call for help, if you will, to the utilities to see if there is fiber that they can extend in that area, or if there is a signal device that they can mount to project a signal in that area. On behalf of Governor Scott, I'd also like to thank several internet service providers, cable companies, and mobile wireless companies who've already stepped up to help Vermont through the COVID-19 emergency. And if you're at home and you have access to the internet but you can't afford it, there are offerings now online that you should be looking at to see if something will work for you. Those offerings are detailed at the Vermont Department of Public Service website. Companies that are offering such discounts or temporary free service and the like are VTEL and Burlington Telecom, Charter, Comcast, and Q-Link, just to name a few. With that, Governor Scott, I've concluded my remarks. If I turn this back over to you.
be happy to open up to questions at this point.
All right, everybody, I believe you, all the press on the line were, we let you know.
Hello, can you hear me?
Patricia, just a moment, please. We have until 12:45 today, so please ask your one question. If you have a follow-up on that topic, that will be okay, but we'll have to circle back on any questions, on any remaining questions if we have time. And as usual, we're going to start in the room, so let's go to Kelly.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you. So, a question about the PPP loan. So, kind of a two-part question. First off, can we quantify how many people that work for small businesses this has kept out of the unemployment line?
I'm not sure that I have that information, and I'm not sure who's on the line at this point. If Commissioner Pichek is on the line, no? Maybe Secretary Curley might be able to answer this.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I had a hard time hearing the question. Could you repeat it?
Can you repeat that,
Sure.
Calvin?
Can we quantify how many people PPP loans have kept out of the unemployment line here in Vermont?
I'm sorry. I
Yeah,
apologize. I think it's about PPP loans.
Yeah, Lindsay, I might be able to summarize. Just wondering how many Vermonters were kept out of the unemployment system as a result of PPP?
I don't have an answer for that. I don't know of any specifically, so we can see if we can find that and get back to you.
Yeah, that's a relevant question, because some of what we, I think Congress had anticipated was if you offered this PPP program, which would give businesses some money to keep people on, it would prevent people from going into the unemployment system. So we'll try and do what we can to gather that information. Might need some help from the SBA in order to do that, because I'm not sure that we know exactly who has taken advantage of the program and who has accepted. But good news yesterday with Congress passing an additional measure to put more money into PPP and other SBA loans, so that'll be beneficial to Vermonters.
And just a quick follow-up to that as well. Of course, it was intended for small businesses, but across the country, and maybe even here in Vermont, we've seen bigger businesses jump in on these loans. Should they be allowed to take up this money?
I believe, and I don't know all the pieces to this legislation that was passed yesterday by Congress, and maybe I don't even know if it's been passed by the House at this point. I know it was passed by the Senate. But I believe there was a carve-out for smaller businesses and larger businesses as well to prevent that from happening, acknowledging that maybe some other bigger companies took advantage of it and some of the small companies weren't able to. But I believe that they have a carve-out. But again, that may be a better question for the congressional delegation at this point.
Stuart?
Governor, the Chancellor of State Colleges this morning has withdrawn his proposal to close a number of college campuses based on the backlash and on the hope that the state will help get them through the immediate crisis. Do you support that? Do you think he's on track or reading the situation right after so many in the state basically called for his head?
Well, this is the first I've heard of it, Stuart, so this is news to me, breaking news from Stuart Ledbetter. So at this point, I know that there has been a severe backlash, and I know it was jolting to many. But for some of us who have seen this coming, I've presented budgets over the last 3 years that have included additional funds for the Vermont State College system because we've heard the cries for relief in that regard. I'm not sure that everyone understood that. They certainly do today. But just putting money into the system isn't going to fix the systemic problem that they're experiencing. So I would just say that whatever we do as we move forward, we have to keep an eye on how do we preserve the system after the fact. We don't want to just pour $50 million into a system, let's say, when a year from now, we're going to end up in the very same spot. So we're going to have to be careful in consideration. I look forward to working with the legislature. I'm sure they'll be involved in this. This is something that they could take on, as well as the entire education system. Because as I said the other day, we spend $1.8 billion for K through 12. And when you add in higher education and early care and learning, there's enough money in the system. We just have to figure out how to deliver it in a much better way.
Governor, on that subject, yesterday, former Governor Douglas was talking about, we've kicked this can down the road for a long time. There were actually problems back in the Keyser administration back in '61. And he said, we've been kicking it down the road. He, as you have said, that he included increases for the state colleges over time. Most of the time they were taken, but other times they were not. He said, really, we've reached the end of the road. We can't go any further, so something has to be done. What have you reached any sort of an avenue that you can take?
Well, I have not, and I've advocated for the legislature to get involved in this, that there may be a deeper dive into what the issues are. And as I stated the other day, if we're going to subsidize, if we're going to put money in to keep the system going, I'd much rather subsidize to help the rural aspects of the state, the rural parts of the state, the Lindens and the Johnsons and so forth, rather than putting money just into Chittenden County, which is doing fairly well right now. So whatever plan is moved forward, I think the trustees have to be involved, the legislature has to be involved, or some entity needs to take a real hard look at this. And how do we deliver education, again, that's affordable, that is something that can continue? Because, as I said, just putting money into the system to prop it up is just not being visionary enough to preserve the system in its entirety. Because if we end up putting $25, $50 million, $100 million into whatever into whatever programs or systems or sectors, if we end up in the same position a year from now that we are today, that's just a waste of money from my standpoint.
And just to follow up quickly, is this a case where possibly a marriage between the public school system in Vermont, K through 12, and the state college system could be a way to go?
Well, again, I've advocated for the last 3 or 4 years to take a look at the entire system from cradle to career. And I believe that this is a time for bold action and creative thinking outside the box. And maybe it could be some sort of marriage between the two. As well, taking a look at all of our higher ed throughout the state, not just the state colleges, and how can we interact? How can we deliver a better product in the new age and this whatever the new normal is? This isn't. We aren't the only ones facing this. I've been on calls with other governors throughout the country over the past week. Everyone is facing the same challenge. How do we preserve what we have or make it better? But seeing that things are going to change. This is going to be the case again throughout the country, not just Vermont.
All right, we're going to move to the phones. Patricia, go ahead. Patricia, I think you muted yourself.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you. Sorry to jump on earlier. I forgot you go to the ones in the room first. I am just wondering, at a board meeting last night, a school board meeting local here in the SCSU, there were some concerns shared that the state education fund, I believe that was the term used, is not being replenished or may not be replenished, and funding from the CARES Act may not be going to that fund either. The person saying this was concerned basically about how the school is going to continue to be able to provide for education for students, especially when schools open back up, presumably in the coming academic year, and there are even more overhead costs. He was expressing concern that that may not be possible with such a non-replenished education fund, and I'm wondering if that is in fact true that that education fund is not being replenished, or if it's being drastically cut, or what's going on with that.
Well, I can tell you, I'll start off, and then I'll let Secretary French answer part of this. I'm very concerned about the funding streams, the education fund being one of them, transportation fund being another, the general fund being another. There's really little money going into the general fund at this point. So we are going to have to make some very, very tough decisions throughout the next 6 months, 12 months in terms of how we, again, take care of what we have and prioritize our basic needs. So in terms of whether it's going to be replenished or not, we haven't received the guidance from the feds in terms of the money that we have already received. So it's there, but we haven't received any guidance on what we can do with it. We know what, for instance, that it has to be COVID related. So what that means from there, I'm not sure. But replenishing funds may not be part of their guidance. So we'll have to see. But Secretary French, is that something you could add to?
Yes, Governor, thank you. I would just, I think it's useful to understand the scale of the problem that should be of concern to all Vermonters. So in our best estimates, I think right now, what I've seen, they're expecting a $90 million shortfall in the current fiscal year in the education fund. And remember, we have a truly statewide education funding system, so that's all of our spending. From what we know about the CARES Act revenues that are dedicated to school districts, that amount will equal around $30 million. So on the one hand, for Vermont. So we have a $90 million deficit, if you will, in the overall education fund, and that's a positive estimate in the best case scenario. At the same time, we have federal revenues of approximately $30 million coming in. So just to give you a sense of the idea that, yes, the CARES Act funding will certainly be important for districts to navigate some issues in the near term, but it doesn't begin to cover the shortfall that we're seeing as a result of revenues falling off and so forth. So there are going to be some very difficult decisions to be made in the near term, but certainly starting immediately in the next fiscal year on July 1 as well.
Oh, honey, thank you.
All right, we're going to go to Greg at the County Courier.
Hi, thanks. So I want to follow up on Stuart's question real quick. Is the state looking at a tuition reset like New York and other states have done in order to cut down on administrative costs? And then I have a question for Dan French after.
Well, again, I think everything has to be on the table. I'm not sure what is going to be contemplated, but this is an issue that the legislature will probably, I would assume, will be working on sooner rather than later. It was news to me that the proposal had been taken off the table, but that doesn't make the problem go away, right? They're still there. They're still facing a cash flow problem that will rear its head in June, from what I had heard. So, and then there's a systemic problem moving forward due to lack of enrollment and what's going to happen. I'm not sure that any of us can anticipate whether we're going to be utilizing the college system in the same way that we're using it 6 months ago. So, and that could be said for K-12. I just don't know what's going to happen over the next few months, but I'm sure that everything will be on the table.
All right, thanks. And a quick question for Dan French. What's the state education department doing for driver's ed programs? Are they able to continue operating to the point where students are going to be able to get their licenses? Obviously, in rural areas like Franklin County, driver's licenses can only separate people socially more than we're already doing. And is the state looking at any other programs that are or are not able to follow their curriculum enough to get their students through?
Yeah, thanks. That's a great question. It's actually on the agenda for the State Board of Education's meeting this afternoon. so the issues around the requirements for driver's education and other academic aspects of our program are covered in their regulations. So we've submitted a waiver request to the state board, and they'll be actively deliberating on that this afternoon and take some action. So stay tuned, I guess. We'll hopefully have some guidance on that here very shortly.
Okay, we need to move to...
And are there other programs in the state that are not able to complete their requirements?
I haven't asked for any other waivers at this point. The only other waiver that the board contemplated that was very early on in this emergency, and that pertained to the number of calendar days in the school year. So we have that flexibility to deal with waiver requests on those requirements, but at this time we haven't asked to waive any other academic requirements.
Okay, just a reminder, if one question, topic, and then if we need to go back to you at the end, if we have time, we will. Sean Cunningham, Chester Telegraph.
Thank you. This is also for Secretary French. There are a number of estimates out there regarding the coming shortfall in education funding, and we've heard a warning that local schools should prepare to borrow money aside from state funds to operate their schools. I'm wondering what strategies for containing costs and planning for the shortfall is the AOE giving boards, and I have a quick follow-up.
Yeah, thanks. We haven't put out any guidance recommending borrowing. I will say, however, in the testimony I provided, I believe in the Senate Finance Committee a week or so ago, my conclusion was that there is going to need to be borrowing at some point unless we address some of the cost issues, and probably even if we are aggressive on the cost issues, there's probably going to be need to do some borrowing in the near term. I think, once again, since our education finance system is fairly unique relative to other states, the question is, where should that borrowing occur? Is it something that should be done at the state level, or is it a function of school districts or their local municipalities? So I think, it's been challenging, as the governor alluded to. We don't have all the specifics yet on things like the federal money coming in, and I think we're now wrapping our arms around the magnitude of the financial situation. And I know when I've spoken with legislative leaders, they're coming to agreement that this is a pretty significant concern, and we're partnering with them very closely to address that in the coming weeks. But I think it's an evolving issue. I think there's a near-term question that we have to resolve for fiscal year 20, but then also we have to prepare for the 21 issues that are coming at us pretty quickly. So to your question, we hope to put out guidance directly to districts, I think, particularly on fiscal year 21 issues. And that'll probably start to look like just putting out budget guidance very early in the process, probably right when the fiscal year begins, as opposed to waiting to the fall to do that. Because I think the implications are pretty significant for fiscal year 21.
Just to follow up, there's about 85% of the collective bargaining agreements that have yet to be finalized. Is the AOE giving any advice regarding dealing with current and future teacher and support staff contracts?
No, generally we avoid getting involved in labor issues such as collective bargaining. I will say, though, it's there are cost issues that will no doubt have to be addressed. We're seeing that pattern emerge across the country now in school districts. And I think, as you're aware, 80% of our costs in education in K-12 can be attributed to staff costs. So the impact on staff salaries and employment numbers will be significant, I would venture, as we get into the details of this crisis.
Thank you.
All right, Mike Donahue, the Islander.
Good morning, Governor. Summer tourism across Vermont remains a major concern, and we got an email that included a comment that travel agents are pushing Vermont as a summer destination. Vermont's got a lot of upcoming events with large crowds, including like the Champlain Valley Fair, Rutland State Fair. Just about every county has a fair. What have you told those organizations, especially if they have contract requirements for canceling entertainers, ride companies, food providers, and others, and also for local concert series at local venues?
I'm going to ask Secretary Curley to answer some of that question, but I will say that everything that we're going to do, every step we take, again, is going to be based on the data and watching the modeling and making sure that we're not moving in the wrong direction and open up as quick as possible. So it's really hard, difficult to anticipate whether any of those venues that you had mentioned will be able to open this summer or not. Maybe they will, but again, if you look back on how far we've come in the last 6 months, and then think about 6 weeks or 8 weeks from now, things could look totally different. But it's all going to be based on what we have for information at that point in time. Secretary Curley?
You bet. Yeah, just to reinforce that, as you said, right now, we are not authorizing non-essential gatherings of any kind exceeding 10 people. So it's, that's through the executive order of May 15th at a minimum. So we really don't have an answer right now. For folks who have something in the more near term, they probably ought to be really thinking about an alternative or doing something that looks different, getting creative. But again, it's just too soon to tell.
So at this point, they really ought to be pulling the plug on the county fairs for this summer, is what you're saying?
I would not say that at this point. I mean, I just don't see that we can advise that one way or the other at this point, if they think it's necessary for them to take that step now, based on the information that we have either provided or not provided. That would be up to them, but that's not what we're saying at this point.
Thank you.
All right, Joe, Barton Chronicle.
I believe this is a question for Dr. Levine. I am curious, is the testing being done proportionally across all areas of the state? And if so, should testing show that an area, say like the Northeast Kingdom, has fewer cases of COVID than the rest of the state, would you consider advising opening up the state on a regional basis?
So, with regard to testing, your question really sounds like it's looking for equity in testing, so that people in all parts of the state have the same opportunity to get tested. So we've been very strategic in that regard. The National Guard, of course, helped us set up a site in the southeastern part of the state. The federally qualified health centers in Grand Isle and in Island Pond have been very instrumental in having testing expand to those areas where we hadn't detected as many cases, just being concerned that we wanted to make sure that the reason we weren't detecting cases wasn't because of lack of access to testing. So I think all regions of the state have really had the opportunity to have that part of their population participate in testing. In terms of, I think your second part of your question is really, would we regionally open up certain areas preferentially based on the results of testing? We're not a large state. That's a real challenge when I think about that. Knowing, just traveling within the state is quite easy to do, especially this time of year. And, we've been very concerned, and the governor's been appropriately working with his fellow governors in the region about what happens when the borders of the states are all opened up. And if states have different strategies for testing, different strategies for containment of the virus, different social distancing strategies or what have you, and they all work in concert, that can perhaps work well for everyone. If they're not working in concert and they can't possibly do everything together, that becomes a real challenge. And I would think even within the state, we still have to think somewhat of the fact that we're not that large. It's easy to go from one part of the state to the other, and we don't want to create any kind of ill feeling and ill will across any sections of the state by saying one part is doing so well that they can have these privileges versus another part. I don't think, we're not built that way, and I don't think that public health could even operate that way within the context of such a small region.
Thank you.
All right, Collins, 7 days.
I just want to say something more, Joe, in that regard. It's tempting, obviously, when you look at different parts of the state or different parts of the country to open up. But you might imagine if we were to say just the Northeast Kingdom were able to open up and just Barton or Island Pond or Averill were the only areas of the state open with their lakes and ponds and so forth, what that would drive there. I mean, we would have a mass of people from all, probably other parts of the state, but outside of the state as well, coming to your communities. And I'm not sure that would just create another hotspot. And that's what we're trying to prevent. Our preference is to do this on a statewide basis and continue to open up as we see declines, and the modeling supports that, and to open up just as quick as we can in just a methodical way.
All right, Colin, 7 days. Colin? All right, we'll go to Chris Roy, Newport Daily Express.
Yes, good morning, and thank you. I'm just wondering what the state is doing about mandated classes that can't be done virtually, like PE classes. Could somebody explain what's going on with those requirements? And thank you.
Secretary French?
Yeah, hi Chris. Yeah, everything, obviously is subject to the stay home order. So there are elements of PE class that certainly can be done through instruction, but also students can exercise and do things on their own as well. So I think, as I mentioned earlier, the shift to sort of like project-based learning or asynchronous learning just means that people do it differently. So I think, we can see all kinds of different patterns emerging and ways to accommodate student learning during this time.
So are you taking it on the students' word that they're doing the physical activity?
Well, I mean, what we've seen in instruction from other areas is that teachers are meeting directly with students on a face-by-face basis using technology. So certainly, I don't know if there's examples, but I imagine there are of teachers and students meeting online, and students are actually physically exercising in front of the teacher or submitting a data log from a smart watch, if you will, or some sort of Fitbit kind of device. So I'm sure there's all kinds of methodologies by which students can document their learning in that regard. It's not optimal, but I'm sure it's going on.
Sure. Okay, beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Austin, Burlington Free Press.
Hi, everybody. Austin Danforth. My question, I think, is for either Governor Scott or Secretary Curley, or potentially both of you. But as mild as the spring has been compared to the recent years, I know it's made the closure of golf courses even more frustrating for Vermonters who are otherwise doing their part in staying home. I've heard from a lot of them. I've also been keeping up on correspondence with the Vermont Golf Association, which has been trying to collaborate with neighboring states for some sort of a regional approach. And I'm just looking for an update on where things stand for possibly allowing courses to open for play with certain safety measures in place before May 15th.
I will only answer, and I'll let Secretary Curley weigh in as well, in speaking with the other governors again throughout the Northeast. Maine, New Hampshire are very concerned about opening up their courses too soon because of what we're seeing in Boston, for instance. Last week alone, there were about 1,000 deaths in 1 week in Boston or in Massachusetts. So if they open up their courses too quick, it might lead to more people traveling, coming into their states, bringing some of the virus with them. So we're concerned about opening up some of those areas. We're trying to open up some of the work-related construction activities and so forth right now, possibly some manufacturing as well in the future, but trying to do it again in a methodical way and trying to prioritize. So I don't know about the timelines. I know that they've been, the golf course associations have been advocating for this, but we're trying to prevent the spread, and that means staying home, and it means not gathering, and so forth. So, Secretary Curley, do you want to add to that?
Sure. I don't know exactly where you're located. I woke up this morning to a blanket of snow on our front lawn, so
Same here.
I do. Okay. I do know people are anxious to get outdoors and do this, and you know that our agency, along with some help from the governor's Economic Mitigation and Recovery Task Force action team, is really working on how it would look when the time is right to open not just golf courses but other recreational opportunities throughout our state. So we're thinking a lot about it, but again, so much of it is going to be influenced by what the science and the data say in terms of, you know, the health and safety aspects of opening these things. And if we do it at the wrong time, as the governor said, if we draw people into our state and we arguably open ourselves up to, you know, going backwards in terms of all the work we've done on mitigating and slowing the spread. So, you know, we hear the folks that are passionate about the game of golf and the other recreational opportunities. It has to be really well thought out, and we will get there.
Thanks.
All right, Tim, Vermont Business Magazine.
Hi, Governor. Sticking with the economy, you mentioned a few minutes ago about not much money coming into the general fund. And there was frankly, a pretty good report on Monday on the tax revenues, but obviously April and May and going forward will be worse. Have you set up a worst and best case scenario similar to what Dr. Levine has done on the health side for the revenue side?
I would ask whether Commissioner Gresham or Secretary Young are maybe on the line at this point.
Yes, Governor, this is Secretary Young. Thank you for your question, Tim. What we have been doing is monitoring the revenues on a weekly basis to see if we can anticipate what the end of fiscal year 20 looks like. And the two economists, the state economist and the legislative economist, have been doing that. And that's where we've come up with the predictions as to what the holes in the budget will be, totaling about $381 million overall, half of that deferred into the next fiscal year and half maybe losses. But I have to underscore, until we understand how long we're going to be in this status, how quickly we can restart the economy, at this point in time, it's pretty difficult to predict with certainty where we're going to land in the next couple of months. Discussions have just started now about how can we look forward into FY21 and come up with any degree of certainty as to what we'll be budgeting around in 21 over the summer.
I was wondering also, and this is mentioned earlier as well, about the PPP and maybe that offsetting some of those losses, and as that's factored into your projections as well.
I'm sorry, is that directed at me, Tim?
Well, either you or the governor. I'm sure that the PPP could theoretically really restart the businesses and get much more revenue in and get people paying personal income taxes and corporate taxes and that sort of thing.
Well,
yes, absolutely. Go ahead, Lindsay.
Tim, Secretary Curley, I think I'm trying to understand what I think earlier you were the one asking the question maybe about the PPP as well. Are you trying to understand how that PPP has lifted the burden on the unemployment insurance program? Is that sort of where you're headed on this?
Well, more generally, Lindsay, on the how you may have projected it's going to lift the entire economy. If businesses are paying their workers, etc.
But Tim, they're paying their workers, but they're not actually doing any business. So they're not creating any revenue for their business. They're offsetting some of their labor costs.
And that would presumably they'll be paying their personal income taxes though at that point, right?
Correct. If people are being paid, yes, they will continue to pay income tax. Yeah, we don't have a good grasp on that yet. We know that the state received about $1 billion in those CPT loans. There were nearly 7,000 loans approved of different sizes. And so it's just something we aren't able to quantify. I definitely can't do it off the top of my head, but I'm happy to work with the SBA and maybe some folks, some lenders or some others that could help us quantify some of that.
All right, great, thank you.
All right, Kat, WCAX.
Hello?
Hi, Kat.
Hi. Hi, this is Christine Hinkle from Channel 3. Kat is actually outside covering a protest, which is driving my question. It's a small protest, but people there are telling WCAX that they are frustrated, that the stay-at-home order is government overreach into their personal lives, that they want to get back to work. So, Governor, my question is, are you at risk of losing the support of Vermonters to see more economic damage than health damage from this crisis? And how is that discontent affecting when and how you use spigot?
Well, there's nobody more frustrated, more eager to get the economy going than me. But I'm going to continue to make decisions based on the science and what I think is best for Vermont as a whole and the health of Vermonters. So we'll see what happens when states open too quickly. I think there's a bit of an experiment going on in Georgia as we speak, and we'll see how they benefit over the next 3 to 4 weeks or not. So I'm going to continue to do what I think is best, and I know that many people are frustrated. I'm frustrated. I imagine most of your viewers are frustrated from not being able to go to work and what this has done to our lives and our livelihood. So that can't be a reason. The pressure can't be a reason to do the wrong thing. And we'll continue to do what we think is right, regardless of the political ramifications.
Thank you, Governor.
Ann Wallace-Allen, Digger.
Hi, thanks for taking my call. I'm interested in learning a little bit more about how the state is working with other states, not just in the regional alliance, but any other states around the country. I'm just curious to know, Governor, what your conversations are with other governors and how you guys can work together.
Well, I think we just benefit from talking about our states and what we're doing or not doing, able to glean information, whether it's from Arizona or Tennessee or from Connecticut or Rhode Island. There are many things that I've learned, again, that I think will help us in this state. For instance, speaking yesterday with the New England governors, Governor Baker was talking about his tracing program. And I think that they're spending a lot of money. It sounds like a big price tag, $40 million, but it could be part of the answer for lack of any vaccine, for a lack of maybe universal testing, that tracing could be even more important. So again, we want to be bold. We want to move forward. We think testing and tracing is going to be necessary as we move forward. So that's something that I learned from them. And again, just listening to Governor Lamont from Connecticut and where they are, what stage they're probably at peak or maybe going to be at peak soon. So it just gives us a framework for what we might expect in terms of people wanting to come to our state as well. So we'll continue to work with others. We'll continue to share information that we have that we believe has worked because, again, we put ourselves in a pretty good position. But some of the restrictions we placed on Vermont have been a little bit more restrictive than others. But I think it's been, again, beneficial. And we'll do what we can to open up this economy just as quick as possible.
All right, thanks.
Avery, WCAX. Avery, WCAX.
This question is either for Governor Scott or Commissioner Levine. So Governor Cuomo has announced that he will start to allow surgeries to happen in hospitals that are in less hard-hit areas, elective surgeries. What has been the discussion in Vermont about when elective surgeries will be allowed at any of the hospitals across the state?
Yeah, we've been engaging in some of those discussions with the hospital themselves and the hospital association because we know, again, based on the modeling and the data that we're receiving, that we're in pretty good shape. We have some openings in some of the hospitals. So we want them to get back into business as well. They've presented, or they're working on a plan, and they're working in conjunction with other states as well. We'd like to do this on a regional basis, possibly working with New Hampshire and Maine to do it somewhat concurrently, so that we can open up the hospitals to do some of the elective surgeries like hip replacements, shoulder replacements, things of that nature. So that, again, we can get relief to Vermonters who need it, as well to get the economy rolling again. So we're having those conversations as we speak.
Has there been any sort of deadline set?
We have no deadlines on anything at this point in time, other than we are taking all of those into account in trying to prioritize what we think would be the safest approach as we move forward. Dr. Levine?
Yeah, we've invited, and the hospitals have initiated a lot of dialogue about this. They just provided us with a very preliminary report thus far. They've drawn on some national data and national recommendations that have been very well thought out from associations like the American Hospital Association, the American College of Surgeons and Anesthesiologists. They're being quite thoughtful. They're being very deliberate. They're not pushing us by any means and coercing or anything of that sort. It's been a very nice two-way dialogue. They understand that the reopening of elective procedures, even the reopening of attending your own clinic in a specialty or primary care setting, needs to be part of this overall grand plan of how we're restarting Vermont. So they know that that's not the first thing that would happen. But as the governor said, they do have capacity now because we did not see the extent of a surge that would have taken up all of their hospital beds and resources. Likewise, as we develop new testing strategies and utilize some of our testing capacity, it will become very important to factor in that degree of capacity that will be important at the time people might be coming in to have an elective procedure or might be getting seen for some other reason in one of the hospital settings, because that will have to be very carefully thought out and mapped out ahead of time. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
If I could just add to that as well, what Governor Cuomo might be doing in New York doesn't necessarily work for Massachusetts, Connecticut, or Rhode Island at this point in time. So that's why regional approaches are all well and good. We learn from each other, but to work as a whole region and do one thing could be counterproductive in terms of this pandemic.
Wilson, AP.
Hi, Governor. Thinking about the financial challenge that we all know is coming down the road, would you be willing to reconsider your no new taxes or fees promise? Or do you think getting over the hump back to some semblance of normalcy, would you be open to state borrowing, or do you anticipate, perhaps large state budget cuts and who knows what programs or services?
Yeah. I think it's premature to have that conversation at this point in time. Obviously been fairly successful in not creating new taxes and fees over the last 4 years. But we'll see what happens. It all depends on federal reimbursement, what happens on a national level, and how quickly we can put the economy back to work. So we'll do what we can to live within our means, and I think that's important, raising taxes and putting a burden back on Vermonters who are already suffering. I'm not sure that that's the answer either. So we're going to do whatever we can to make sure Vermonters are are able to continue to live here and be able to do business here.
Okay, thank you.
Andrew, the Caledonia Record.
Yeah, good afternoon. Thank you. These questions are for Dr. Levine. We had a reader ask us, we've been reporting quite regularly the number of cases, and the reader wanted to know how many people would be considered recovered at this point versus just the cumulative total of cases from the start. Can you explain how someone's determined to be covered, what recovery means in terms of that person's health, potential reinfection or continuing contagiousness? And does the state have any figure on how many people might be considered active versus recovered at this point?
Yes, so on a daily basis, from the hospital standpoint, we know exactly how many people are hospitalized for COVID, are hospitalized for what is thought to be COVID but hasn't been proven yet, and who have either been listed as recovered or discharged. But as we know, the majority of people with COVID actually are not in the hospital, thank goodness. At least 80% of them are most likely not in the hospital. So we don't actually have a lot of accurate data on people who have either been tested and had COVID versus those who may have thought they had COVID but never actually got the test and are a presumptive diagnosis. However, our epidemiologic people and our health surveillance are always in touch with people who are test positive, and they do touch base with them usually 10 days later to be sure that they are doing well and to see if there are any other issues that have arisen. So we can compile some of that and get back to you with that data regarding how often people have said that they're doing fine. The other part of your question had to do with, well, maybe you could repeat the other part of your question.
Sure. It was more, what's the benchmark for determining someone recovered, and is it, safe and fair to assume that if they reach that point that, their health outcome will be favorable, there's no continuing issues of contagiousness, things like that?
Sure. So, when one gets COVID and wants to return to the workforce, there are a few pathways we can follow to determine that they are actually recovered and can go back to work. So I'll recite those for you because they would help people who were just wondering if they were better now and could reintegrate. There's a protocol that utilizes testing, and it requires 2 negative tests in a row. And then there's a protocol that doesn't require testing at all, but requires you to be 7 days from the time you came down with your illness and to have had 3 days minimum without fever or other symptoms that you developed at the time. Now, the next part of your question is, what does that mean in terms of your future? And most of the time, we think that means you're going to do pretty fine. However, people have been reading about reports coming out of South Korea where people thought they were doing fine and then had a recurrence of symptoms down the road. The scientists in Korea think that isn't a new infection. It's sort of a relapse of the infection they originally had, meaning that that is possible in the natural history of the disease that could happen. What we would like to know also is it possible to get reinfected? So if you've been well, you had your COVID a couple months ago, can you come down with it again? And that's part of the learning curve we as a global community are on right now about learning the implications of that and what that means. I would also just add one final point that if you are using a testing protocol, it is possible to feel very well and still test positive several weeks down the road. And we shouldn't necessarily interpret that as the fact that you are ill in any way, but there are times that it takes a little longer than you might have conceived to really become test negative, even though you would have thought you would be. So that is a phenomenon we see in other diseases in medicine, not just COVID-19.
Okay, thank you.
Aaron Digger?
We're hearing reports that a family member of a Thompson House nursing home worker tested positive for COVID-19, yet it did not trigger any broader testing of the worker, their coworkers, or nursing home residents in the facility. The state said it has the capacity to test more people than it is currently testing, but it hasn't updated its criteria to test residents in several weeks. Are there any plans or conversations to change the protocols for testing for COVID-19, particularly for those living in or working in group facilities like nursing homes or prisons or care facilities?
Yeah, I'd like to, thank you for asking this question. I'd like to just let you be aware that we are very involved actually with the facility you mentioned, and that there is testing that is undergoing today and tomorrow at that facility because of the fact that there was a staff member who had been exposed to COVID. So our policy is that wherever in the state it may be, any long-term care facility, any nursing home, any correctional facility that has either a resident or a staff member become positive, that's all that's needed to have our outbreak response team go to the facility to begin to help the facility if they need help with testing, but certainly to make sure that testing occurs at that facility immediately. So that is part of the overall policy. One of the things that that policy is evolving to is even actually more aggressive testing. And we're engaged with the CDC in trying to work on a pilot project with them that would actually take that facility that was test positive and have even more frequent testing of the residents and staff in that facility after the time that was discovered. More to come on that in the future. But if anything, we're erring on the side of being more aggressive, not less aggressive in those facilities.
Okay, do you have any idea when that more to come could be?
Soon. How's that sound? It's taking work at the federal level, so I don't want to promise things that are out of my control.
Okay, thank you.
Brittany, Local 22?
Hi, yes, my question is for Governor Scott. So it's reported that President Trump says he'll formally signing an executive order today limiting immigration to the U.S. because of the pandemic. I was just wondering, your thoughts on this and how you think this would impact Vermont.
Well, I haven't seen the executive order he's signing at this point in time, but I would have to question whether it's needed. I believe that we shut down travel to in and out of the country to benefit others as well as ourselves. For the first time in my lifetime, or maybe for a brief period after 9/11, the Canadian border was shut down, and now we have moved forward. I believe the federal government is, in conjunction with the Canadian government, has expanded that for another 30 days. So this is something obviously unusual to us, but having closed down all the travel, shut down the travel to and from our country to almost anywhere, I believe in effect we've already done that.
All right. Liam, BPR?
Hi, Governor. So the Senate Appropriations Committee here in Vermont indicates some support for dollars to go into the state college system. You mentioned.
Yeah, we're not getting any of that. Can you start over?
Okay. Yeah, sure. Governor, the Senate Appropriations Committee indicated they support the college system, and earlier they wouldn't support just putting money into prop up any sort of system. And so I'm wondering if that plan were to come through, would you support it or be?
Yeah, I'm not getting the whole question, but I think I get the flavor of the question. I believe the question is, or the Senate Appropriations Committee, I don't know if they met this morning or when they put together this bill that you're speaking of, but I have not seen it in terms of providing more relief to the Vermont State College system. Obviously, what I said before still stands. We don't have an unlimited amount of money to put into anything. And when you look at all the areas that we're going to have to subsidize in some way, whether it be our healthcare system, our hospitals and so forth, our education systems, every entity, every area is going to have tremendous need. So this money isn't going to go, it's not unlimited, it's not going to go that far. The initiative I did hear out of the Senate was possible hazard pay for the private sector, which again is a great idea, but it has a $100 million price tag. So those types of things we're going to have to consider all in its entirety to determine and try and consider what the entirety is before we start writing checks. And I think that's my concern is that we don't know, again, the entirety of what we're facing as of yet, because I believe that it's still yet to come. I believe that the worst of it is still yet to come from a financial standpoint.
So do you have, like, for yourself, like a priority list of industries or places that might need this money that you'd want to dole it out to?
Again, I haven't seen the list yet, but health and safety comes first. Public safety comes first. So I would have to say our healthcare system is, as we've proven, is really important to us. So we have to make sure that we have that as a pillar of our whole system as well. So again, it's about priority and prioritizing the need and making sure that we make wise choices with the limited amount of money that we have.
Thank you.
Joel, Burlington Free Press.
Yes. Hello, Governor. This is Joel Baird at the Burlington Free Press. I was wondering, because you've been speaking to other governors around the state and other experts around the state, I was wondering, to what extent are you seeing a departure from politics as usual? And is this like a welcome reprieve in your life? I know it is in other folks' lives. To what extent are you able to get things done because is there a greater sense of common purpose here?
Yeah. No, I think your sense, at least here in Vermont, is correct. I believe that people, all of us, have put politics aside and are trying to do what's best for our state and for the people of our state, and that is welcome. And I knew, we've seen it before in history, whether it was after 9/11 or we saw it here in our state after Irene. I think this is welcome by many, and but from my standpoint, it wasn't unexpected because that's what Vermont is about. Speaking with other governors throughout the country, I don't think it is as common in some areas of the country as it is in Vermont, and I just think that it's part of who we are. So I'm pleased with that aspect. There is always a silver lining in every crisis.
All right, well, thank you. You've answered my other questions, and since I'm only afforded one, thanks again.
Thank you, Joel.
Raymond Torres, Channel 7. Raymond? All right, moving to Michelle Monroe, St. Albans Messenger.
Hello, this question is for Dr. Levine. I was wondering if you've been following the reports about excess mortality in areas like New York City and Northern Italy, where they have deaths that haven't been directly attributed to COVID, people that haven't been tested but have died at home or often people who already had conditions, but whose death may have been triggered by a COVID exposure, but they haven't been counted. And if you've been looking at to see if similar things are happening here in Vermont.
Yeah, thank you. I have looked at those reports, and while I don't have firsthand experience in those locations, I do believe what I hear coming from the healthcare community, which is that the majority, but not all of those deaths, have some relationship with COVID. And as I demonstrated in the presentation I gave earlier, it doesn't take much with some elderly, vulnerable people who have a lot of strikes against them already with all of the illnesses that they've been living with for sometimes many, many years. But then you bring something extremely stressful to their body like COVID into the picture, and it doesn't take much. So while we can't attribute all of these deaths in New York and Italy and other places to COVID, it turns out that many, many are related. With regard to Vermont, we don't seem to have that kind of experience here. Literally in the cities you were mentioning, there are people who are almost being newly discovered, or the fact that because they were living alone, or that their relatives didn't know what to do because there were no public services, because things had gotten so critical that all of their systems were engaged with just trying to help who they could help. And so days would go by. Fortunately, our experience in Vermont has not been that. And while we still have people dying of other reasons in Vermont, it's not because that we're finding them all of a sudden undiscovered and have to make an ascertainment as to what happened. We haven't gotten to the stage where our morgues are overflowing and we're using refrigerated trucks as they are in many other locations around the world. So thank goodness for that.
Thank you.
All right, Guy Page.
Governor, given that picking up on AP's question about 2021 budget priorities and declining revenue, will your administration consider spending reductions in either electric car purchase subsidies or Planned Parenthood funding?
Guy, I would just say that there's going to be a number of initiatives on the table as we try and prioritize and live within our means and get through the next year. So I don't know what areas, but suffice it to say that there are going to be a lot of difficult choices to be made.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much for tuning in, and we'll be back with you on Friday.